While I'll still be the composer, the credit that will follow will be AI prompts and concatenation by Rodrigo Cadiz. That means that Rodrigo's work on putting this thing together, on prompting the AI and working with it, is credited, but also obviously the AI as well. And why not use generative AI? It's a starting point.
Welcome to the Research and Reason podcast. Join us as we discuss the latest research, news and opinion from academics in the Faculty of Arts and Education at the University of Auckland.
Kia ora koutou, ko Julianne Evans aho. I'm Julianne Evans, the Media Advisor for the Faculty of Arts and Education. And today I'm talking to notable contemporary composer and music educator, Dr. David Chisholm, the head of the School of Music here in the faculty. Tēnā koe, David, and really nice to have you here.
Kia ora. It's a pleasure to be here, Julianne.
I want to start off by talking about your latest adventure, because you've had a very wide career yourself as a composer, and we could talk about that, but we may get to that later. But the thing that I'm really interested in at the moment is your project with AI and how you decided to ask AI to work with you on a musical adventure, I guess. How did it all start?
Well, I guess it started because AI was unavoidable. As we all know in the last few years, AI has become the thing that everybody talks about, but very few people, and there are a lot of spectres and phantasms around it, what AI actually is.
People are afraid of it, aren't they, in a way?
And I think that's common because people don't really understand what it is. So it's, as I said, it's a fantasy space as much as it's reality. But the kind of AI technologies that we're talking about now have actually been in development since as early as the 1950s. So it's actually something that's been happening for a very long time, but now the distribution and the mass commercialization of these products is available, and they're really having an impact in virtually everything that we do within a kind of technological sphere. So it's like the internet. It's like how the internet transformed the way that we communicate. Similarly, AI is more than a tool. It's a sort of agent. It has characteristics which differentiate it from being something you pick up like a hammer. It's a set of processes, and I think it can be applied in all sorts of different contexts, and people really don't understand that. So it's much easier to simplify and just go, AI, I've seen it in the sci-fi films, and it takes over and it kills everybody and the robots are bad.
And it takes everybody's jobs. And
every sort of futurist fantasy gone crazy. But AI, when it comes down to it, is basically a set of programmed processes that can happen at high speed, in which an intelligence, a computer intelligence that has been programmed, can make decisions based on shapes and patterns. Essentially, it's a very sophisticated pattern maker, which means you can sort of say, what have you observed? And if I told you this, what would you do in response to it? And rather than like in statistical data where you add up averages, it makes decisions based on the recurrence of patterns as well. But ultimately, it's not necessarily a creative force. It is simply, I think it has the potential to be, but it's still being programmed.
By a person.
Yeah, at some point it's been programmed, but it's been programmed to a point where it's gathered so much information or data that it can start to teach itself what it's looking for as well.
And so how did you... what gave you the idea of doing this particular thing? And perhaps you can explain what it is.
I can definitely talk to the origin of it. I've had some colleagues who've been working in this area for a little while, and I was in Chile January last year visiting family and caught up with some colleagues of mine at the University Católica in Santiago. And a really good friend of mine, Miguel Farias, said, I really want you to meet up with this guy who specializes, he's in engineering and he's in music, but Rodrigo Cadiz, and he's super interesting. His specialization is creativity in AI. And I said, I'd love to meet him because I had this stupid idea that wouldn't it be hilarious if you could teach an algorithm, you could exclusively teach it on a personal back catalogue, because most of the commercial products that are out there have been trained on through what we call Creative Commons licensing. So all this hidden copywritten material, there are these loopholes in the law which have allowed really big companies to train a lot of music AI software that people can commercially or subscription subscribe to. What certain genres sound like. So what are the patterns that recur in certain genres of music, which means you or I could simply sit at a computer with this thing and say, prompt with a few words, like green, fields, symphonic, etc., whatever we want.
And it would create something.
And it would create something. The limits of that technology at the moment seem to be around the 90-second mark. So I was curious, what would happen if you trained a catalogue not on the exhaustive or the non-exhaustive back catalogue of Sony or any of the big
but
commercials,
on David Chisholm,
on an individual's catalogue? How would it deal with idiomatic signatures?
And so you gave it specifically a piece of your work that had already been written, composed by you and performed as well?
Yeah, I spoke to my colleague Rodrigo and he said, look, it would actually take an enormous amount of time and effort to do that. But what we could do is give it a smaller selection. So give one of these kind of black boxes, we call them. These are the closed technologies where you don't see how the coding's worked. So rather than actually have to self-code and self-teach an algorithm, which takes an enormous amount of not only time but actual energy, like one of the big problems in AI is actually the amount of power it takes to power AI. It's like scary. Anyway, that aside, he said, so what we might do is we might still be able to use some of these commercially available products, but we'll just use short excerpts from yours and give it prompts and see what it makes of it, see how it kind of interprets it. And that's really how he went about it. He gave it small little samples that would produce and would need top-ups. Every so on it would kind of run out of ideas, so it would need a top-up, so he'd give it another little sample. And then it would spit out, 90 seconds of music. But I'd ask for 4, like in a classical symphony, I'd ask for 4 audio outputs as different movements of a suite of 4 works, basically.
That's what you asked it to do?
That's what I asked him to do.
Yeah,
on
your behalf.
I didn't want to know how he did it. I said, because what I would like to do in my crazy non-technology way, which is me completely, is like, I want to do the technology, but I don't have the technology skills. I said was just to... give me the audio and I will be an orchestrator for it. I will listen to it and I'll use my musicianship skills, which I have, and I'll transcribe the recording onto an actual score, a notated score for orchestra. And that's what I did. And it was nuts process because what the AI thought I would do based on the prompts that Rodrigo gave, and also a colleague of his, Emilio, who did one of the sections, was nothing like I would never make those decisions.
So it's not a piece you would recognise as yours at
When
first?
I first heard it, no, I just went, what, that's crazy. It's like, oh, okay, wow. And one particular section, which is in this first form, is this big drumming section, which sounds more like a Hans Zimmer like film soundtrack, like Backdraft. It's got this, I'm like, wow, taiko almost drumming. I was like, I would never write that. Not with that rhythmic regularity, that repetition. That's so not what I do, but that's what it thought I would do. So at some point it's obviously seen some repetitive aspects of it, or one of the prompts has said be repetitive with percussive, blah, 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 and it's gone into my work and gone, okay, this, reassembled it how it does, and then spat it out as audio. So then I had to make sort of artistic choices, because when the algorithm generates sound, it doesn't sound like an orchestra. It sounds orchestrish, It sounds orchestra adjacent, but some of the sounds are clearly electronic or have a grit to them that you can't produce directly, but you can mimic using good orchestration techniques.
How did you then extract those sounds and write for a 70-piece orchestra? Is that what you've done?
Yeah. So I wrote for Auckland Philharmonia.
Which blows my mind, I have to say. I can't even imagine how you would do that.
Well, I mean, honestly, that's what core composition training is. So, and you start small. I mean, it's very rare to think anyone, even the great composers, don't start with orchestra. You usually start with smaller, either solo instruments or chamber music. The way that I always encourage is you build up. And also you learn the economy of instruments as well. It's like if you can get a good amount of sound out of 4, like a string quartet or 13 instruments, and you can get a lot of colour, you learn with smaller numbers of instruments how to really stretch colour and how to manipulate colour then when you get to a big full palette like 70, you're not thinking in terms of sections. You're thinking about the possibilities of intricate combinations of those 70s. So you can break down your string writing. You might have a few desks of violins. There could be like 13 of them. You also know you could break it down if you needed to into 13 individual parts if you needed to make up a certain orchestral colour. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah. Realising that the component parts are always more powerful. A lot of the time you get unison parts, so strings are often used in orchestral writing and orchestration just for sheer power, because you need more violins to hear over a trumpet. It's literally the acoustics.
Just to add to the volume.
Just to actually be heard, you need, because the violin doesn't make the same amount of sound that a tuba or a trumpet does. So the shape of an orchestra and why you see so many strings is because they produce a weaker acoustic, because they're made of wood, and they, the way that they're built doesn't resonate in the same way that brass carries or percussion carries. So the skill of an orchestrator is finding balance. But in really advanced orchestrations, it's like going, okay, well, how do I create a growling low sound that sounds unpitched but is clearly pitched? How do you make an electronic rumble sound, but for orchestra? And so if you've had that training in smaller groupings, it's much easier to go, okay, I can dig into super details here. They don't all have to be playing the same thing.
No. And so do you think we could hear a little bit of this?
Yeah.
So just reiterating again for anyone who's just started listening to this, what we're going to hear now is?
So this is the first what I call form. So there are 4 forms in total, 3 yet to be transcribed, 1 yet to be fully concatenated as an audio output. So I have another composer.
What's that word you just used, David?
Concatenation. So when you have,
I've never heard that in my life.
So it's really literally putting things together, compositing things. So because I wanted 5-minute sections and the AI can only produce 90-second ones, you've got to concatenate a few. You've got to bring a few together. But it's more than just like cutting and pasting. Concatenation implies that you're going to have some logical sense of flow between the ideas. So, so it's not just going, this bit, then this bit, and this bit. You want to make sure that when you're putting things together, it's seamless. It feels like one piece. And that's what Rodrigo's done. So that's a process that Rodrigo does with what the AI has produced. So again, there's another composer's hands creating the form. And to answer your question, I did use tools. I used various what we call spectral analysis tools, which show where the frequencies are and also where certain pitches are. So I could look for pitch dominance, which gives me an idea about what sort of harmonic language I would use. But more importantly, time coding. I could see when events would happen, and I can time code within the notation software I use, Sibelius, which is an industry standard. It has time coding capacity as well. So you can make sure that events align. And actually, I'll play you an example of the very opening of the work.
So that's the work for people. So that work
this is the first form.
Of your work or AI's work?
Who knows? No, this is what I got from Rodrigo, basically.
Okay.
So I'll play you the first maybe 15 seconds or so of what I got from Rodrigo.
And then you'll play me what?
And then I'll play what Auckland Philharmonia
did
afterwards. So once I transcribed it, how it transferred onto a live orchestra. So I'll put my headphones on so that we can actively listen, which is good. And I'll play the AI version first. And here we go. That's probably enough of that. And then this is, I transcribed it, and this is what the orchestra played, and they were conducted by David Kay. And this was in November last year at the Arte Centre.
Wow.
So I don't know if you can hear, but They have a relationship.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. Very dramatic, both of them.
Yeah, and the shapes are the same, but they're
Yeah.
embellished in my version. So I make choices about how to get into certain figures. I use scalic runs to get into certain figures. I foreground certain materials that you only really can hear when you listen to it multiple times up close. So there's background information, if we can call it, in the AI recording, that when you intently listen to it for a long period of time, you go, look, I hear that. So I go looking for what that pitch stuff is, and I bring it to the foreground by instructing certain instruments to have a greater dynamic, a greater volume.
Was it a thrill to hear it? Were you sitting in the audience?
It's it's always a strange experience to sit in the audience, regardless of how you've built the work, because it's a part of your brain, and it's a whole and it's an enormous amount of your time sitting with a particular piece. So it always feels slightly dissociative, I have to say, regardless of how it's been made. When you're hearing a work, and I advise any composer, never go to the first rehearsal. It's always awful. Because the musicians are still trying to map themselves. So rule number one is never give feedback after the first read-through, because they're just finding it. But no, it wasn't stranger. But what was interesting is that you're looking at it against a model, and that's where it's different, because when I generate material conventionally, I'm just coming up with the ideas in all sorts of ways.
And you've had your work widely
I've been very fortunate.
Performed, haven't you?
I'm in very diverse places globally, and really interesting places. Whether it's India or South America or Finland or the States or just very, very not random places along the way.
Diverse places.
And
orchestras and smaller groups.
Orchestras, ensembles. Yeah, actually, in the scheme of it, I've been pretty lucky because I've been an independent composer. I'd never had an agent. I have a Paris-based publisher, but again, publishers are great for scores and distribution. But getting performances, that's something that I've always had an active role in. And it's mostly because I've been collaborative. I've rather than having an agent who says, well, you've got this commission and this commission and that, I've been like, who do I want to work with? And then the step before that is, what is the idea? So I've shaped a practice as a composer rather than a career. And that's what I also encourage my students to think about as well. Not just the composers, like all the performers within the School of Music here. I also say, if you think about it like a practice, then you have greater agency. You can perform on the stage of Carnegie Hall, for example, one night, and you can be working in the communities in Thailand the next, because it has meaning to you. So I really try and dismantle the artist hero image that we have of both composers and performers, which is really, honestly, a 19th century hangover. I think musicians are at their best when they're working in a collaborative context and often within community context. So I've written for community orchestra as well, and that was phenomenally fun. I could do great, crazy things that I would never be able to do with a professional orchestra, because with a professional orchestra, you've generally got very little time. So you've got to get it right.
They're expensive as well, aren't
They're
they?
an expensive resource when you've got 70 people in one room and you're one of 4 works on a program and you're the new work, and you've got to really know your craft because there's no time to waste. Working with the community orchestra back in Bendigo in regional Victoria, it was great because I was living there and I'd go along to rehearsals, every Thursday, and I'd bring 5 seconds of sketching along and they'd take a look at it and then I'd go away again. So it was there's so many different ways to work. That's what I mean. You come up with the idea first, or an opportunity presents itself and you go, what is the right idea for working with these people? But I love working with musicians. So collaboration is at the centre.
And back with AI,
the
piece that has already been performed and the pieces that are yet to come,
Yep.
how will they be credited? So the byline will be, because that's another interesting area of AI, isn't it? And music, who owns it?
Absolutely.
What level? Who is the author of it? And to what degree do you decide that, depending on amount of time, amount of input? Is it David Chisholm and AI, or David Chisholm and AI and somebody else?
Well, look, even before I was working with AI, I was working very closely with highly specialised musicians, contemporary musicians, and I often think they are like co-authors in a way, because you're often coming to these musicians who are highly skilled and they know techniques that you don't. And so it's very rare to find a a contemporary, like a new music specialist a musician that isn't also really a collaborator or essentially a co-author. So I've been floating notions of co-authorship for a while in terms of my work, thinking they always get credit or they get dedications. One of the great benefits of living in Aotearoa, which I've been here for about 6 years, having moved from Australia, from Melbourne, is that I've been working in a bicultural context. It came up in a workshop in Nelson when my first year here, young Pākehā composers wanting to work with tongapuro, which are the Māori instruments. And what's really interesting about tongapuro is that the traditions were sort of practice were lost, but they were rediscovered or reinvented, I should say, in the 1980s by Hirini Melbourne, who's a composer and Māori activist, and Richard Nuns, who's an ethnomusicologist. And so there was this fusion between a Māori activist and performer-composer and an ethnomusicologist, basically working together in consort to say, well, okay, we have the actual artifacts, so let's reimagine the possibilities of it. Within that, I advise any student that if you're working with a specialist musician, whether it's a guitarist or tongapuro in this case, there is the question of co-authorship. And so I think with AI, you have to extend it naturally. It's co-authorship in a way. So while I'll still be the composer, the credit that will follow will be AI prompts and concatenation by Rodrigo Cadiz. That means that Rodrigo's work on putting this thing together, on prompting the AI and working with it, is credited, but also obviously the AI as well. And why not use generative AI? It's a starting point. And I think that's what we tell our students with all sorts of ChatGPT or Copilot, whatever they want to use. Use it, but don't imagine that that's the end point. That's the beginning. And the good researcher knows you can't just rely on it to write your essay. You have to, it helps you, it supports you, but the key word is generative. I could generate an idea at a piano or guitar or just out of my brain, but the real work in composition is actually 90% is editing. It's like refining. It's going, so what is this idea? How do I improve it? How do I make it more and more sophisticated? And in essence, that's where I emerged in this process. So the AI generated this thing and I went, it sounds nothing like me. I start working on it and I pore over it and I labor it and I identify things. I foreground materials, like I was saying, and suddenly it does sound like me. The spoiler alert is, guess what? I'm a product of my training as well. No different to the AI in that sense. And that's been really, really fascinating. And that's what Rodrigo and I are going to be writing more about. It's like, okay, so it's a process. And I'm as much a product. I make decisions all the time based on the limits of my knowledge at that time and the training that precedes it. And that's what AI does.
And that's what AI does.
Exactly. So it's not going to kill us. It may be us. It's simply another mirror version of human cultural activity. So, yeah.
And let's work with it and learn from it,
like
and
anything.
Expand on it. And
if you use it badly, it's going to have a bad output. If you use it wisely, it's going to be wise as well. So, yeah, don't be hating on the technology, I say.
And what's going to happen now? So you're, just to review what you're doing, you've got a suite of work coming up sometime next year to be played by the Auckland Philharmonia, who are a very notable orchestra in New Zealand, based in Auckland. They've already done one of your works, Fountain, and that's the name of it, isn't it?
Fountain is the whole suite.
Fountain's the suite.
And they've done Form 1, and there are 4 forms.
So
Forms 2, 3, and 4.
I suppose,
Yeah, I want to just say form, not to be pretentious, but because it is a form, it is a structure, and it's a structure that I've inherited from the AI. So it was another acknowledgement of the fact that, well, actually, these things I didn't create. The things that prompted, I got it as something that was pre-formed, like a mold or a shape.
And then you worked with it.
And then I worked with it.
And then you orchestrated it.
And then I orchestrated
for 70 instruments.
I know.
You crazy person.
Well, also, an orchestration and arranging is often seen as quite a lesser task for composers, but actually,
I can imagine it's very hard.
Huge skill, and it's like actually some of the best work you do is in, as I said, is in the editorial space. 90% of it is not about the ideas.
And the creativity that comes from that, and the new ideas.
Yeah, you have to be innovative and you have to have instincts. You have to have these human things, and you've got, Yeah.
Yeah.
We've still got a role to play.
Yes, good. And finally, you are off to Chile very soon, I believe.
I am in a couple of weeks. I'm actually about to take 3 months research and study leave, we call it, university, which means I'm paid to go and just focus on my research, nothing operational for me. And one of those is a laboratory that with Rodrigo and with Miguel, my colleague in Chile, and a couple of musicians from Costa Rica and from Venezuela. And we're really just looking, again, it'll be the nexus of technology, composition, AI, form, electronics. Like, it's a lab for us to kind of figure out. It's a starter lab, so we're kind of figuring out how might we collaborate in the future. But while I'm there, we'll do some work on Fountain as well, just on a couple of articles that we're writing about process.
David, thank you very much for coming in.
It's my pleasure.
It's been delightful to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to hearing and seeing what you do next.
Me too.
And,
what does AI have in store for me?
I know, and I want to go and see, go and hear Fountain next year whenever it comes up, and I'm excited. I'm excited about all these possibilities.
Me too, and I'm really excited to see, again, a lot of our students in the School of Music uptaking this technology, and we encourage them. As I said, it's a starting point. It's not the end point. Nothing has changed in that sense.
You've been listening to the Research and Reason podcast. Stay up to date with the Faculty of Arts and Education by following us on social media.